Good afternoon. This is a meeting of the Town of Collingwood's Corporate and Community Services Standing Committee for March the 6th, 2023. The first order of business is the land acknowledgement, and Councillor Doherty is going to read that today.
Thank you, Mayor. For more than 15,000 years, the First Nations walked upon and cared for the lands we now call home. Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Ojibwe, and many others who were families, friends, and communities the way we are today. The town of Collingwood acknowledges the Lake Simcoe-Nottawasaga Treaty of 1818 and the relationship it establishes with the original inhabitants of Turtle Island. We acknowledge the reality of our shared history and the current contributions of Indigenous people within our community. We seek to continue empowering expressions of pride amongst all the diverse stakeholders in this area. We seek to do better and to continue to recognize, learn, and grow in friendship and community, nation to nation.
Thank you. I'll just note that Councillor Ring has sent his regrets for today's meeting. The next item on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda. And it reads as follows, that the content of the Corporate and Community Services Standing Committee agenda for March 6, 2023 be adopted as presented. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Baines, Councillor Potts. Would there be any comments or questions? All those in favor? And that's unanimous. Thank you. Would anyone have business arising from the previous meeting? Seeing none, would anyone have a declaration of pecuniary interest for the agenda this afternoon? I see none. If you do find yourself in that position, please make me aware at that time. We have a deputation this afternoon. It's a funding request for microplastics program by the Georgian Bay Forever Group. Would Ms. Morrison be here? Welcome.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you on behalf of all of you for having me here today. My name is Ashley Morrison, and I am a project manager with Georgian Bay Forever. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Georgian Bay Forever is an environmental charity that's dedicated to scientific research and public education on Georgian Bay's aquatic ecosystems. Our mission is to protect, enhance, and restore the aquatic ecosystems of Georgian Bay by funding accredited research on water levels, water quality, and ecosystems. GBF is generously supported by volunteers, community groups, provincial and federal grants and funds, as well as municipalities, local businesses, Indigenous communities, and more. Next slide, please. Thank you. Yeah, no worries. Thank you. Today I'm here to request $5,000 to continue our progress in our shoreline cleanup programs. We would be using these funds to help in hiring, managing, and deploying local summer students to conduct shoreline cleanups throughout the town of Collingwood and local shorelines. Our summer students will also help to support, train, and recruit volunteers of both adult and youth groups. Next slide, please. Divert and Capture is a program that I manage. So this program is centered around mitigating plastic pollution, specifically microplastic pollution in Georgian Bay with an emphasis on microfibers. This program has three overarching goals, including engaging the community in hands-on cleanups, public education for both youth and adult groups, as well as deploying the 300 microfiber filters that we have in southeastern Georgian Bay with the washing machine filter program. Next slide, please. 2023 will mark our 5th year hosting shoreline cleanups and our 3rd year being in the town of Collingwood. At each event, we set up a booth similar to what you're seeing in these photos here, where we're able to engage with community members and beachgoers to educate them on the harmful effects of plastic pollution, as well as physically divert garbage away from our shorelines. At each event, we use this trash tally sheet that you're seeing on this slide to be able to categorize the types of waste that we find at the shoreline and be able to report back to each town we're working with the types of pollution trends that we're finding within the area. Next slide, please. In 2022, Georgian Bay Forever hosted 18 shoreline cleanups in the Collingwood area. And with the help of 101 volunteers, we were able to collect just over 300 pounds of garbage. Our shoreline cleanups primarily took place at Sunset Point, but we also hosted shoreline cleanups at the Harborview Park as well as First Street. Our findings were similar to what we saw amongst other pollution trends within other townships, as well as with global pollution trends. Cigarette butts were our number one most collected item, totaling almost 4,000 cigarette butts from these 18 shoreline cleanups, followed by paper and cardboard, plastic film, plastic fragments, and foam. Next slide, please. So despite having garbage cans and recycling bins at multiple points along the waterfront, we collected numerous bags of garbage at each event, with many of these items being found in the rock break walls, as well as other gathering points such as picnic tables, parking lots, and driftwood along the beaches where most people will end up gathering. Sunset Point specifically proved to be a really interesting spot to harbor decades-old garbage. This bag here was actually one of our oldest and most interesting finds, nearing almost 50 years old. So this bag is from a store called Valley Foods, which through extensive research from our previous summer students, we found out used to exist in the Giant Tiger location right now on St. Marie Street and closed in 1975. Next slide, please. We found a lot of different types of pollution that has been in existence for a really long time. So the three images that you're seeing here are all dated back to the early 80s and are comprised of, in order, plastic film and foil, styrofoam, and glass. These items go to show that when we introduce anthropogenic items such as these into our environment, they persist for extensive periods of time. While these items are dated from the early 80s, they're still in relatively pristine condition, yet they've been contributing to the microplastic pollution crisis since they've entered the environment. Over time, they've been degraded and broken down into smaller and smaller pieces that spread throughout our aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems. Next slide, thank you. So our shoreline cleanups support the town's commitment to sustainability as they foster public awareness and participation to work towards clean and healthy communities while working to protect and restore local ecosystems. The data we collect at these events contribute to the town's ability to review waste management strategies and solutions for growth. In addition, shoreline cleanups provide the opportunity for both beachgoers and community members to engage in conversations around sustainable use of resources, to spread awareness, and encourage appropriate use of local parks and beaches to minimize negative environmental effects. As we continue to engage local community members in shoreline cleanups, we help to foster a sense of stewardship and care for the local environment, which creates an inherent desire to protect it. Next slide. The work that we do for shoreline cleanups isn't just to create pretty beaches. It has a more profound impact to protect, restore, and enhance water quality. We live in a plastic-centered world, and that has a significant impact on our local environments. We often hear and see of these dramatic images of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. However, what is even more alarming to know is that the concentration of microplastics in the Great Lakes is equal to or greater than that of that concentration found within the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So microplastics, as I'm talking about them, for those who are not aware, microplastics are small pieces of plastic. They're less than 5 millimeters in size and come in a variety of forms. So they can come in fragments, fibers, foam, nurdles, or microbeads. Essentially, what ends up happening is when we take a coffee cup and release it into the environment, that's a macro piece of plastic, and as it breaks down into those smaller pieces, it further spreads throughout the environment in the form of microplastics. Microplastics are having a significant impact on aquatic species, ecosystems, as well as our health. In this study that you're looking at here, a bunch of fish species were sampled, and in that sample, they found 100% of the fish sampled had microplastics in them, with the most dominant form being microfibers, being nearly 97%. Microfibers are types of microplastics that come from the textile industry and specifically our clothing. The impact of these microplastics are not just impacting our wildlife, it's impacting anyone who eats, breathes, and drinks, including ourselves. Right now, recent studies have indicated that on average, humans are consuming roughly 5 grams of microplastics on a weekly basis. That's the equivalent to the size of a credit card. Microplastics are being found in our tap and bottled water. It's being found in our beer, our salt, shellfish, and fish. And most recently, studies have come out finding that it's in our own bodies as well. This is why conducting shoreline cleanups and research on pollution trends is integral. Another way I'd like to note that we are also actively mitigating microplastic pollution from the bay is through our current ongoing research project on the washing machine filter studies. So right now in southeastern Georgian Bay, in all of these areas marked with an X, we have just over 300 microfiber filters installed that are actively diverting microfibers from the source, which is our washing machines. The study concludes in March of 2023, the end of this month, and I'd be happy to provide the town with our findings once the report is readily available. I'd like to thank everyone for having me here again today and just reiterate our ask of $5,000 to be used in hiring, managing, and deploying local summer students to be able to continue the work that we're doing in our shoreline cleanup program here in town.
Thank you very much. Very sobering statistics. Thank you for your hard work. Would there be any questions or comments? Councillor Baines.
Full disclosure, I am one of the 200 or so in Collingwood that have been participating in the washing machine filter test. Phil, you're telling me, is the water coming in through our municipal system, does it contain microfibers? I assume it does then.
Yes, so microfibers are being introduced into our water systems in a variety of ways. So the first being that, so when we're looking at the washing machine specifically, the washing machine effluent is being discharged down into our wastewater treatment plant. And the wastewater treatment plant does have the ability to capture a significant amount of microfibers. However, one of two things happen. Microfibers either bypass the wastewater treatment plant altogether and actually discharge directly into the bay, or alternatively, in an effort to reduce our waste, we take the treated sludge from wastewater treatment plants and we spread them onto agricultural fields. So they can capture up to 99% of those microfibers, and while that's great, and they're captured within that sludge, by spreading them onto agricultural fields, they're being reintroduced into the environment through runoff.
And just a supplementary, if I may. So I assume this is a federal government issue in regard to the banning of microfibers in clothing? Or is there anything on the horizon for that?
Right now, we aren't looking at the textile industry specifically, but we are working to help reintroduce the microfiber policy to be able to actually mandate washing machine manufacturers to have the microfiber filter installed directly into the machine rather than relying on external filters.
Thank you very much. No more questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. I'll just congratulate you again on the work. I've participated as a volunteer with Georgian Bay Forever for a long time, and an extensive amount of work that you have undertaken over the years, everything from Phragmites to now shoreline cleanup. I'll also mention that I am participating in the Divert and Capture program, and I'm astounded at how much fiber just two of us can produce by washing our clothes. So it is, I hope that you will be able to make a case to mandate manufacturers to start to incorporate those kinds of filters on the machines. I just also want to make a comment. I was also astounded, I mean, really actually gobsmacked at the amount of cigarette butt refuse that you are capturing. And, you know, it seems to me, you know, in our municipality as a, you know, officially smoke-free municipality, it's hard to overtly attempt to capture cigarette butts because, you know, fear of sending a message that, you know, we encourage or we encourage smoking. But when I was in Europe, you know, it's also a problem in Europe, obviously, and I saw refuse containers specifically for cigarette butts that, you know, were relatively small and quite attractive. So they certainly can be incorporated around a community. They send the message loud and clear, and hopefully would assist with this problem. Actually, I did send a picture around to council members. I'm wondering if I could just put it up. Is that possible? So it's pretty obvious what it's for. And this was in Vienna. So I hope that we can start incorporating this kind of mechanism in our garbage cans throughout the community. Thanks.
Thank you. I will add to that if that's okay. Yes. There is a program called TerraCycle that does recycle cigarette butts, and we are installing 10 of them within the town of Blue Mountains. They are available and they do exist. They're quite easy to install, and those are conversations I'd be happy to have in more discussion with the town.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Hammond. So, Ashley, thank you very, very much for this. I did apply at the beginning to participate, but I didn't have enough. I didn't meet your minimum standards to participate. So, I guess that means I'm having less of an impact. I'm going to go with that. Anyway, this was our former mayor's one of his pet projects and initiatives and awareness, and I was in Vancouver at the aquarium, and they had a really quite effective display there about this very thing with plastics. And I'm wondering if there's an opportunity, if that moves around or that we could bring in, because I thought if you had it somewhere where there's a lot of participation by the public, it would be really great education communication piece and just kind of the very things that you're pointing out to us today. But in the aquarium setting, it was really quite effective, and I thought it was good information. So I thought I'd bring that up. I did send pictures back to the mayor at the time. And anyway, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question for you. Our town is a member, and me in particular, of the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Cities Initiative, which is a bilateral between the states and the U.S. endeavor to have, clean Great Lakes and St. Lawrence River. So there's a conference coming up in early June, and I'm going to go down to where the conference is. It's their 20th anniversary. And one of the things they've asked us recently is if we had any resolutions we would like to bring to get passed. So if it's all right with you, I'm going to have Nicole Yardley reach out to you. Because it would be, I'm sure you have a million things on your mind. If you could wave a wand and the federal, Canadian, and American government would adopt this, what would it be, right? So if it's all right with you, I'll just have her reach out because I know she's thinking hard right now, and perhaps you have something we could use.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be great. Thank you.
Okay. And also I know I'll just mention that Councillor Perry's going to bring a motion on this later. So thank you for bringing this forward to us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is the staff report concerning post-COVID downtown boulevard patio and retail display and staff's review of that. Hello, Deputy Clerk. You're going to present today on this, so thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, committee staff and the public. I just appreciate this time taking out of your afternoon to go through this presentation. Go to the second slide there, Annie. The purpose of the staff report is to review the downtown boulevard patio and retail display program post-pandemic, ensuring risk mitigation and accessibility while providing options for businesses in the food and beverage and retail sector to participate in extended service areas and providing the longevity for years to come of this program. Next slide. The use of sidewalks in the downtown for the display of retail merchandise and seasonal patios has been permitted throughout the various bylaws and programs for over a decade, with the town's continued support for temporary patios in promoting a sense of vibrancy, improving the pedestrian experience, and supporting business and community within the downtown. A detailed review of the program's background is provided in the staff report should you wish to review it. As we all know, a pandemic was declared in 2020, which changed many things for us, including but not limited to the ways our businesses were being able to operate during this time. Business owners were required to adhere to rules set by the province and various agencies that included such measures in maintaining physical distance separations, hand sanitization, and capacity limits. Relief of these requirements was provided to businesses in an effort to assist them in operating during these difficult times, and these included the AGCO's requirements, which were lifted with respect to temporary patio extensions and release of their fencing requirements for designated liquor areas outside. And the town implemented a temporary relief bylaw to provide flexibility with patio locations and fencing materials, allowing them to encroach onto streets, and with curbside retail displays no longer restricted to just weekends. Next slide. The temporary relief bylaw was put into place by the town. It was very successful. We had the most participation in 2021 with 17 sidewalk patios, 11 on-street patios, 2 winter patios, and 4 retail merchandise displays on the curbside where you see the white tents with merchandise provided under them. Next slide. Although the pandemic was difficult for many businesses, it did provide opportunities that were not available pre-pandemic. To understand what works well and what didn't work well, a public survey was released, receiving almost 2,000 responses from the public and business community. In this review, other considerations were also taken into account, which included guidelines published by the Ontario Traffic Council with regard to patios within the right-of-way, and our original bylaw coming back into force in effect after all these provisions were released. With the lifting of all the restrictions and flexibilities put into place during the pandemic, it provides for an opportunity to explore continued flexibility and enhancements to the program while continuing to ensure the safety of the public is maintained and risk mitigation is imposed wherever feasible when using the sidewalk and roadways for these purposes. Next slide. Town received an overwhelming response to the survey as previously indicated, and just to provide a quick outline of those results, a majority of the people believe that that patios helped to enhance the experience of the downtown and supported the continuation of both on-street and sidewalk patios. 70% of these participants that responded didn't have any issues finding parking spaces in the downtown, with 24% noting that they sometimes had an issue finding parking spots while the patios were installed on the on-street parking areas. In terms of patio fencing, 67% were in support of unique fencing opportunities, with 28% preferring a uniform fencing look, just as was provided pre-pandemic. And accessibility in the downtown was scored generally well, with some comments made on the accessibility of the 2-meter pedestrian walkway through the downtown. 74% of the respondents felt that there should not be a fee associated with the use of public property for these purposes, but those that agreed with a fee, they were in support of a fee based on a square foot occupied by the patio for the duration of the use. In response from the survey, an overwhelming majority feel that adding activity like patios, retail merchandise, public art, and fresh produce for sale on the right-of-way provides an animation in the downtown, enhancing the overall experience for patrons and the pedestrians. As we get back to normal here, there was some legislative changes that affect patios, especially on public property. The Ontario Traffic Council provided guidelines. These guidelines provide for current traffic safety measures that the town has been looking at also through this process. Ontario has also made their changes with some liquor license requirements for patios that offer alcohol on their patio. These include the AGCO no longer accepts or approves temporary liquor license extensions for patios and has downloaded this onto the municipality for approval. And temporary patios are only permitted to operate a maximum of 8 months per calendar year as per the guidelines provided by the AGCO. Proof of outdoor patio licenses or licensed areas will be required now as part of the process to ensure that they have either a permanent liquor license or require a temporary extension relief. So now to the nitty-gritty. This staff report provides 3 options for council's consideration in terms of this patio and retail display program. The first option is to remain status quo, meaning that the original bylaw number 2011-30 would remain in effect. We are recommending some amendments to this to provide some flexibility, which I'll get into a bit later. This option does not provide for on-street patios. Second option is to adopt a new bylaw, program standards, and the Ontario Traffic Council guidelines for on-street patios, and this would also incorporate the continuation of sidewalk patios and retail displays. And the third option is to adopt the new bylaw to implement the program standards with a reduced speed limit along here Ontario Street and not implementing the Ontario traffic guidelines and utilizing the existing barriers that were previously used in 2021 and 22. It should be noted that the town will be undertaking a visioning exercise for the future uses of here Ontario Street, which is currently anticipated to occur in 2024, pending further discussion with the budget for this project, and it may provide additional alternatives for consideration specific to this program. Option 1, the current bylaw would stay into effect. Recommendation to amend the bylaw to allow some flexibility in terms of fencing materials and winter patios on a case-by-case basis, and provide retail stores the opportunity to provide their curbside displays during all days of the week instead of just on weekends. No additional traffic safety measures would be required for this option. And it was further noted that on-street patios are not permitted in the current bylaw. We also have a set of fees that will be discussed later in this presentation that could affect this as well. In option 2, this option provides for a new bylaw that would be enacted to provide for the following: an endorsement of a set of standards through the enactment of the new bylaw that would include terms and conditions of the program, application and approval process, operational requirements specific to insurance, liquor licenses, signs and advertising, site plans, etc. Design guidelines for patios as provided for in the standard and OTC guidelines. Program implementation, including installation, maintenance, modifications, renewal, and enforcement, the adoption or endorsement of the Ontario Traffic Council guidelines, flexibility with fencing materials for patios. We're suggesting patios be permitted from May 1st to October 15th to ensure proper road and sidewalk maintenance can be undertaken. And sidewalk winter patios would be permitted on a case-by-case basis. The town would be responsible for the costs associated with the installation, purchase, and rental of the on-street traffic safety measures for on-street patios, with some recovery built into the proposed user fees. So in the Ontario Traffic Council guidelines, it provides for a recommended traffic barrier type and standardized signs to enhance safety when a patio is placed on the roadway. This illustration provides the suggested barriers and signs for the patio located within an on-street parking area. So you'll see there's bullards, warnings coming up to the patio, traffic barriers around the patio, and signage as you approach the patio as well. Next slide. Within these guidelines, there's 2 recommended barriers to be used for this purpose, and it's an urban barrier, which is the first one in the picture, and a water cable barrier. The recommended urban barrier, it meets the crash test requirements as outlined in the guideline, has a more streamlined appearance than other barriers. It has a base of 12 inches, which would reduce the amount of modifications needed to the on-street patios from last season. And the estimated cost for this, we looked at 6 on-street patios. It would be $40,000. And option 3 is the implementation of the standards without the approval or endorsement of the OTC guidelines. This would include an implementation of a reduced speed limit along here Ontario Street to 30 kilometers an hour, not endorsing the Ontario Traffic Council guidelines, reusing the curb stops and bullards implemented in the previous years, and potentially increasing safety risk. Implementation of the proposed user fees, which will be provided later on in this. Although this would reduce the costs associated with the patio initiative by removing the $40,000 for the rental of the urban barriers, by doing this, it does place the town at a higher risk for liability should a collision occur with the patio positioned on the street. The enforcement of the reduced speed limit would need to be discussed with the Collingwood police, as without a targeted enforcement, the town is at increased risk again of liability related to persons and property injury. An estimated cost to enact additional speed enforcement for 5 months would need to be considered in addition to the cost provided in this report. In terms of patio construction material for fencing, the current bylaw restricts patios to black metal fencing only. As there was a strong support for unique fencing from the survey results, staff are recommending a mixed materials to be permitted, including natural wood, black fencing, and the use of natural rope between fence posts. This approach would allow the majority of last year's permit holders to reuse their existing fencing while continuing to be respectful of the Heritage District and downtown beautification by maintaining the neutral look and color. In terms of on-street patio platforms, there was some concern with the stability of these platforms. If they reach an exceedance of 600 millimeters off the ground, they would require a building permit to ensure their occupancy loads meet Ontario Building Code standards. So the current fee structure is on this slide here. This has been in place for many years, but has been waived and free of charge for at least 6 years, I'm going to say. Understanding that there was a great support to provide this space to businesses to use free of charge, there is an inherent risk with this use and municipal resources spent on implementing the program, including but not limited to the review of applications, conducting inspections, and ordering and installing traffic barriers and signage specific to on-street patios, and the loss of parking revenue on on-street parking patios. Although the survey results indicated there was little influence in finding a parking space during this time frame, complaints were received from businesses that were in close location to the patios on street and not providing adequate parking within close proximity to their businesses, impacting the accessibility of their business. The town estimates $21,800 in potential loss of parking revenue in 2022 due to on-street patios. So the proposed fee structure has 3 components. There's an annual application fee, a lease rate fee, and use of parking space fee. The purpose of these fees is to recuperate costs associated with the program, its administration, and cost recovery for the use of public property. Next. The annual application fee has been developed based on the risk level involved in the use of the public space in terms of application review and inspections to ensure public safety, with the on-street patios being highest risk with their proximity to the roadway and platform construction required, and installation of traffic barriers and measures. So retail merchandise displays and cafes are at $80 for an annual fee. Sidewalk patios, $150, and on-street patios, $350. The proposed lease rate has been implemented in many municipalities to compensate for the use of public space on a temporary basis. This acts in the same way as leasing indoor space in a building for the use of a business or commercial operation. The purpose of this lease rate has been implemented to act in the same way as leasing indoor space in the building for the use of commercial space. There's some acknowledgement that these patio spaces drive people into the downtown, providing benefit to the overall economy within the downtown. However, patios are installed for a set period of time, making that space only usable by the patrons of the patio, with profits from the use of that space going directly to that business. As there are more costs associated with an on-street patio in terms of traffic safety requirements and installation of barriers, the lease rate is more in this case to assist municipality in recouping these extra expenses, keeping in mind that they continue to make best efforts to keep the patio initiative affordable while keeping the costs in mind for the taxpayer. It should be noted that the rates provided do not provide full recovery of the on-street barriers costs in option 2. A lower fee has been provided in option 3, identified as it does not require as much staff resources, and we have the existing bollard stops and barriers in place from previous patio installations. The fee specific to the use of parking is to recuperate the lost parking revenue as a result of an on-street patio consuming these spaces. The current fee illustrated here is currently provided in our fees and services bylaw and is generally applied Monday to Friday, and was the calculations put into effect in the staff report provided. So the proposed fee structure, this slide provides examples of the overall fees that would apply to a patio for the season, should they be endorsed for inclusion in the fees and services charge bylaw. In addition to these fees, the businesses would be responsible for the costs associated with their patio itself, including but not limited to the installation of the patio, its fencing, furniture, and platforms. And oversight of the town regarding the required traffic safety measures is strongly recommended, as a municipality at the end of the day is responsible for the safety of our roads and adherence to the respective legislation. And the last slide just outlines the budget implications of each of the options. With option 1 remaining status quo, there's potential revenue from these collections, which would be put into a reserve to be created. Option 2 is the new program with sidewalk patios, retail display areas, plus on-street patios, endorsing the OTC guidelines. So there's a gap in funding for traffic barriers of approximately $11,000 and potential loss in parking revenue of $16,000. And this was based on 6 patios, on-street patios in the downtown. Option 3 is a new program using the sidewalk patios, retail displays on sidewalks, plus the on-street patios with using the existing barriers. This potential revenue in this option that could be put towards the reserve if it was created in approximately $7,000. Potential loss in parking revenue would be $21,000, and there's a higher risk liability to the municipality in this option, and enforcement ability and costs are unknown at this time. And with that, I'd be open to answer any questions that you may have. I think we might have someone in the public that will want to speak to this.
Okay, so at this point, would there be any members of the public who would like to speak to this? Yes, please come forward.
Hello, Cassie McKell from Lowdown Bar here in Collingwood. Thank you, Deputy Clerk Dahl,
Okay, welcome back, Council. At this time, what I'd like to do, unless there's any other comments or questions. Oh, Deputy Mayor Fryer, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Ham. I'm supportive of option 2. This is Ontario, and I find that many safeguards are excessive and aesthetically unpleasing. But the fact of the matter is that they're guidelines by agencies that we would look to for support if there was an incident and we were trying to comply to the guidelines. So I'm favoring option 2. I agree with the idea that the parking fees be considered to be waived, and I'm supportive of. So I just wanted to be upfront to everybody that I'm looking at option 2.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other comments? Yes, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Hamlin. I did have one question to ask the Deputy Clerk. Through you, one question I forgot to ask was about that 8-month restriction with respect to the licensing, alcohol licensing, how that works with the 2 permits, because if they do a sidewalk permit plus a winter permit, does that 8 months apply as spread over both? Will they be restricted as to how long they're licensed within each period? How does that work?
Through your worship to Councillor Jeffrey, the new AGCO requirements say that a temporary extension can only be permitted for 8 months. So if a business was really looking to operate a patio year-round, I would strongly encourage them to apply for a permanent outdoor liquor license for their business.
Thank you for that. I just wanted to understand that. So if it's appropriate now.
Not yet. Hold on. Would there be any other comments? So what I'll do before I go to, because I know Councillor Jeffrey has a motion she wants to put on the floor, is I'll just seek a motion to accept the staff report. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Houston, Councillor Doherty, all those in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you. Councillor Jeffrey, over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Hammond. So I would like to propose option 3, waiving the use of parking space fees. So within that option, we are supporting reducing Huron-Ontario Street to 30 kilometers per hour and not endorsing the Ontario Traffic Council. But with that, I guess we'd also ask staff to come back before council as an amendment with a report back on what we could do with the barriers that would hold us in good stead going forward. Clerk will look at me whether I have worded that appropriately or not.
Okay, thank you. Could I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Baines, thank you. Any questions, comments? Councillor Potts.
Thanks, Mayor Hamlin. Just in regards to reducing the speed limit, as we were just discussing, do we have any idea of what cost that would be kind of applied to that? I don't think it's as easy as just putting signs up and reducing the speed limit. So an idea of cost would be probably quite helpful. Thanks.
Deputy Clerk Dahl, can you speak to that?
Thank you, Your Worship. To Councillor Potts, I can speak to part of it. So there would be the cost of signage and installation of the signs. In the report, it also notes that we'd have to consult with the Collingwood Police to ensure that it's enforceable and what those enforcement costs would be. So it would be a takeaway on our part.
Yes, Director Slama.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Councillor Potts. I would say outside the cost of signage, I just want all of Council to be, or committee to be aware that this would require a passing of a bylaw to lower the speed limit.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
And I think Deputy Mayor Fryer, sorry.
Thank you, Mayor Hamlin. And I'm just going to restate that I'm in favor of option 2. I know that there's going to be some information come back about barriers, which may change my thinking, but at this stage, I'm going to continue to support option 2.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments on the motion? Yes, go ahead, Councillor Jeffrey.
So do I need to add a bylaw, a recommendation of that bylaw at this point, or no? That will be future? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I'll bring this to a vote then. All those in favor? That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Are you in favor?
Just for clarification, we
Yes.
are waiving the lease of the parking spaces. Okay, yes, sorry.
Thank you. Okay. And those opposed? Thank you. That passes. That carries. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Deputy Clerk Dahl, for that work. The next item on our agenda is the following: that the minutes of the various committees and boards provided below be received and the recommendations contained therein approved. 7.1, Collingwood Downtown BIA Board of Management Minutes, February 9, 2023, and 7.2, Museum Advisory Committee Minutes, February 16, 2023. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Doherty, Councillor Perry. Any comments or questions on these? Seeing none, all those in favor? Thank you. There's no items for the consent agenda today. The next item is the update on the remote office hybrid work arrangements that Executive Director Peg is going to be delivering. Thank you.
Good afternoon, committee. I'm pleased to be here to provide an update on our remote work policy as requested. So in terms of the title of the policy, you'll notice here I've put in brackets hybrid. And the reason for that is we really do feel that the word hybrid more accurately reflects the agreements and the policy that's currently in place. So you'll see throughout that I'll use interchangeably remote and hybrid, but just to point out that hybrid really is a more accurate reflection of our program. I also wanted to note that Manager McQuaig from Human Resources and Manager McNulty from Fleet and Facilities are on the Zoom link. So if any of the questions get very technical, I'm pleased to have them as the support team in the gallery. So if any specific questions come up in their divisions, I will lean on them. First slide, please. So in terms of the policy, our remote work policy has been in effect through council approval since January 1st of 2022. So we're just over a year now of having this policy in place. And the policy came on the heels of the, I'll call it, closure of our COVID-19 protocols. So throughout the pandemic, as I'm sure the committee is well aware, there was a number of parameters put in place to respond to the pandemic. And that included for the town a significant amount of fully remote workers. So through direction of council, we transitioned to a remote policy, which saw the return to office of the majority of our staff if they did not have a remote work agreement in place. And I'll speak more to that throughout the presentation. So the policy itself is committed to providing excellence in customer service. So staff continue to be well aware that customer service is a top priority of council and this committee, and it's a top priority of ours as well. The policy recognizes our need for fiscal responsibility, sustainability, staff accountability, and creating a workplace culture that sees the attraction and retention of high quality staff. The policy also outlines how we will administer our remote work arrangements and makes them a mandatory requirement. And it sets clear expectations for maintaining or exceeding service levels. Next slide, please. So the town implemented the remote work arrangement for a number of different reasons. So as I mentioned, the policy did come at the, I'll call it the end or the closure of our COVID-19 protocols. But the learnings through COVID were not the sole reason that the policy was recommended and adopted by the council of that time. So first of all, enhancing employee attraction, retention, and productivity was a main goal of the policy. So we did complete an employee engagement and well-being survey that indicated that a number of staff did have flexible work arrangements as a top priority. And a number of new employees that have been recruited to the town reference the policy as one of the key considerations for accepting employment here. And I will also note that it's a very competitive market right now for professional staff, and specifically in areas like planning and engineering. So we continue to have conversations with potential hires, and one of their first questions is always, what is our hybrid or remote policy? Outside of Collingwood, though, looking at attraction and retention, a survey by Business Canada indicated that 43% of employees indicated they were very likely to look for a new job if their employer didn't have some form of flexible work arrangement. And flexible work hours and ability to work remotely were one of the top 5 factors of Canadian office workers, and were actually placed higher than workplace culture, opportunities for growth, advancement, and training and development. Another goal of the policy was to reduce environmental impact and enhance sustainability practices. So by reducing the amount of commuting required by staff on a daily basis, would reduce our impact on the environment by reduction in GHGs. Another goal, improve inclusivity and diversity. So Canadian Human Rights Commission has 45 calls for inclusion. Call 19 states, protect caregiver rights. Canadian employers should support employees to fulfill both their family caregiving and work responsibilities by putting in place policies and practices for caregiver leave, remote and flexible work, and other measures that recognize and respect the human right of employees to be accommodated. Aid in resolving workplace accommodation constraints was another goal of the policy, and this is specifically around the need for less office space, and I have a slide specifically around accommodation where I'll speak to that in more detail. And it also encourages us to look at collaborative spaces when we are looking at the design of new buildings, and really focusing on bringing people together as opposed to specifically just office space. Facilitate options to contribute to work-life balance and work-life integration. And that is extremely important in a time of, I'll call it a mental health crisis, which is something that I know Council and Committee have been hearing about through different divisions and departments. And then supporting the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, specifically no poverty, good health and well-being, gender equality, and climate action, among others. Next slide, please. The principles of the policy, and there's quite a few, so I'm only going to highlight a couple. So employees will provide a level of service equal to or greater than that provided while in an on-site work location. Employees shall maintain a performance rating of satisfactory or higher. Employees shall protect confidential information and records. Hours of work will be managed and measured, so all employees are required to complete a timesheet that indicates the hours of worked per day. The employee must comply with all corporate policies, and the employee must ensure care and control of the assets that are assigned to them for remote work. Next slide, please. So there are also a number of safeguards put in place to help ensure professional and ethical conduct, and to ensure that our employees are well aware of our expectations. So this includes the most recent council adopted employee code of conduct, our electronic monitoring policy, our whistleblower policy, along with other policies that employees are required to follow. So basically, any employment policy remains in effect for our remote workers. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, remote work agreements are also a mandatory component of the policy. So all employees who have been approved to work remotely must complete an agreement to acknowledge that they have read the policy, understand their responsibilities while working remotely. The agreement not only must be signed by the employee and their supervisor, but also their manager, and department heads must also be consulted and provide final approval. So there's many eyes taking a look on what roles and individuals are being approved for this type of work arrangement. Currently, we have 67 staff that have remote work agreements in place, and no employees are 100% remote. All staff are expected to come on site when required or requested. I'll also make reference here that we recognize through the policy that not all employees are eligible for a remote work agreement. There are some roles within the organization that unfortunately can't participate. So for example, fire and rescue services, firefighters cannot remotely fight fires, at least not yet. Maybe someday when the technology becomes available. So I wanted to just take a moment to say thank you to our frontline workers that come in each and every day. And we hope to find other creative opportunities to recognize those folks. Again, recognizing that not all employees are eligible to participate in this program. Next slide, please. Since it's been over a year since nationally, a lot of organizations have moved to remote work arrangements. Statistics Canada has come out with some data, which has been very helpful. So roughly 40% of Canadian jobs can be done from home or remotely. New remote or teleworkers favorably assess productivity and report strong preference for working from home. Grab a drink before I start choking. Thank you. Hopefully that fixes it. So remote or new teleworkers or remote, Stats Canada uses teleworkers, another interchangeable term. Favorably assess productivity and report strong preference for working remote. Increases in the proportions of Canadian working from home. Stats Canada notes could potentially reduce greenhouse gas emissions. There's an increased feasibility of working from home, could also increase job security in future pandemics. And the international stage also shows an increase in remote work, and they provide statistics from Europe and Asia and across the world. There is still some unanswered questions in terms of the long-term impact of remote work. So what is the impact on public transit or the requirement for national office space? If remote work's adopted, across Ontario, does that mean we have a surplus of offices available? And that's yet to be officially determined by Stats Canada. Next slide, please. In terms of statistics for us specifically, so at the town of Collingwood, a review of the stats, so our email volume, Teams meeting frequency, and remote logins confirms that remote employees continue to be engaged and perform in a manner that matches or exceeds in-office productivity. So under our electronic monitoring policy, our IT folks were able to confidentially access information and aggregate it so that we could get a sense of logins of remote workers. And we were pleased to see that what we had suspected was true, that employees continue to be highly productive while working from home. Hybrid meeting arrangements have also resulted in an increased meeting participation and attendance. I know Clerk Almas has reported on that in past for council and committee meetings, but we also see it in other stakeholder meetings as well. And then hybrid and remote options support employee return to work. If someone's been off on a medical leave, we've use this policy as a form of accommodation, which contributes to the town further being an inclusive and accessible employer. Next slide, please. Our senior leadership team, so our department heads also reviewed the policy and provided their feedback. Department heads confirmed by overwhelming majority that the policy has contributed directly to the town in the following ways. So our ability to attract, recruit, and retain professional staff, an increase in employee engagement and well-being within their divisions, and better productivity of staff. And again, the statistics that were pulled by our IT department confirm that. Department heads reported no negative impact to service and program delivery, and department heads indicated that the safeguards in place are effective and that they are not aware of any misuse or abuse of the policy. Next slide, please. In terms of budget implications, so our 2022 budget included a carryover from the previous year that was $15,000 to support remote work implementation costs, and the council approved 2023 budget was reduced to a $5,000 cost, given that the $15,000 wasn't fully used in the previous year. Next slide, please. This slide here is intended to highlight the costs that are saved, so cost avoidance as a result of having hybrid options. So I did include here a statement that a public report regarding accommodation plans will be forthcoming. So we'll be certain to provide a much more robust update on that accommodation plan and its impacts. And before I get into the numbers, this may be the area that I use the call a friend option with Manager McNulty on the line, because himself and Coordinator Landry were the individuals who did the in-depth analysis that pulled together the numbers that I'll share with you now. So capital costs of a single office space in our existing facilities are estimated between $64,000 at a office on the third floor of the library, up to $240,000 to add an office at Town Hall. There's a couple assumptions that have been used. So office areas at 100 square feet, with gross building area at 275 square feet. So that's to include things like lunchrooms, washrooms, et cetera, within that 100 square feet. So in addition to that, capital costs for a single office space in a new build is expected or estimated at $82,500, and capital cost avoidance as in effect of a single remote worker is estimated at $55,000. So this assumes the creation of a new build workspace and a hoteling station is provided for every 3 remote workers. Capital cost avoidance per staff averaged over all of the office staff is $11,000. And the operating cost savings are estimated at approximately $1,000 per month per office by having individuals working remotely. And that number seemed quite high to me, so I did walk through it with Manager McNulty several times, including right before this presentation, to make sure I understood it. So I understand if committee has questions, and Manager McNulty would be happy to speak to that. Next slide, please. We also took a look at what are people around us or municipalities around us doing. And we were, I'll say, pleased to see that many employers, private and public sector, continue to be progressive in their practices. Township of Springwater, following a successful pilot project, recently did affirm their intention to move forward with the 4-day work week. Town of Wasaga Beach, who didn't move to remote options during the pandemic, recently has announced their intention to modernize Town Hall and review alternate work policy through their Council 2022 to 2026 vision. Other comparators have remote or hybrid policies that have been fully adopted and implemented. That includes Town of Blue Mountain, Innisfil, Aurelia, among others. Next slide, please. I thought this was an interesting snapshot, and I got this information just from an article that was public. So Algonquin Algonquin Highlands is one of a handful of municipalities in Ontario that have now started offering their employees the option of a 4-day work week. And then the others that are already doing this are listed there. So Almer, Zora, Springwater, and French River. And I thought this was really interesting because it's northern communities that have identified this as an opportunity to help in many ways, including the attraction and retention of staff. So that was called out in the article. And then there was a statement from the article as well that said local government and private sector can benefit from the switch, experts say. So again, I just thought it was quite promising to see how remote Ontario is using these opportunities to attract and retain staff. And next slide, which is the last slide, talks about continuous improvement. So first and foremost is the customer service evolution. Shortly, within the next month or two, Manager Matsiak from customer service will be attending a meeting to provide an update on our evolution of customer service. And this is something that we're working on regardless of remote work. But I thought it was important to highlight it here, recognizing that there is sometimes a belief or a perception that remote work impacts or negatively impacts customer service. And I'll put a plug in now to say that our customer service staff are available every day during office hours at Town Hall, front counter, and we have tons of services and program registrations available online through our website as well. So the evolution of customer service is something we continue to look at and look to improve, and of course value the committee and council's feedback on opportunities as well. We continue to do an annual review of our remote work agreements, which includes a sign off on the new staff code of conduct and our respectful workplace policies to make sure that staff continue to be aware of and remain accountable for the trust that's placed upon them when they do work remotely. And then our annual performance objectives and work plans. So not only is this a requirement of remote work agreements to have these in place, but it's a requirement overall, regardless if you work remote or not. CAO Skinner is quite passionate about making sure that they are in place, which is great. And these plans look at things like the operational plan, our master plans, and our community-based strategic plan to make sure that the individual plans align with the overall corporate plan. And these performance objectives and work plans are used to help assess the success of the remote program. So if a remote employee was knocking it out of the park and then switched to remote and all of a sudden nothing was achieved, under the policy, they would be required to come back to the workplace full time. So there are those safeguards in place as well, and a measurable way to make sure that employees continue to deliver. And that was my next slide. So I would be happy to take any questions or comments.
Okay, thank you for that thorough presentation. Would there be questions or comments? Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Hammond, and through to Executive Director Peg. So thank you for that really informative presentation. I know from a staff perspective, we're really confident and supportive of the remote work. I'm not sure the public's there yet in terms of their assessment of it. And I think, fortunately or unfortunately, some of our remote staff live in the community they work. And so when people see them outside their home during a work day, but they don't understand if it's a day off, it's their coffee break, if who knows, they have no understanding of that. So I think their minds kind of go to worst case scenario. So if you're a remote worker and you live out of town, well, I guess you're pretty fortunate because nobody's watching you that way, but it is harder on the ones that live in our community. And I do hear a lot about it. I was wondering what percentage of our staff complement that 67 of staff works out to.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you through the chair. So our remote worker enrollment for January 2023 is 24% of our office workers. So we have 149 office workers. Of those, 24% have remote agreements in place. In terms of our total percentage of that, I would have to quickly calculate.
About a quarter, I bet. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So I think that we're doing a good job with it. Another thing that comes to my mind is, although, we think it's a sustainable process, I think there's some risk to people who live in this community not being able to get a job in the community in which they work if we go remotely with all of our decisions. And I don't know where that gauges into our whole HR process. If we continually go outside the community to hire everyone in one of these remote jobs, then the people in Collingwood are going to have to find remote jobs somewhere else, I guess, or they're going to be on the road traveling to jobs outside of the area. So I don't know if we weigh that into what we're calculating in this process.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Through to the councillor. So because all of our hiring is skills-based, certainly the best candidate for the job would be shortlisted, whether they live in Collingwood or not. There's currently no requirement to be, a Collingwood resident or live within a certain distance, unless you're a volunteer firefighter, I presume. That being said, none of our agreements are fully remote. So if someone lived in British Columbia, for example, unless it was an absolute extending circumstance with CAO approval, they would be required to be in the workplace at some point throughout the week.
And then you had referred to timesheets, and I'm wondering, is that just a tracking of I started at this time and I finished at this time, I restarted at that time? Or is there time, like when I worked in law offices and accounting offices, my timesheet had to reflect what file I was working on for billing purposes. So for productivity purposes, would those timesheets reflect specifically what files they were working on?
Thank you, Chair. So we're not quite that far along in terms of the law firm sort of docket approach. That being said, employees are required to remain in regular contact with their supervisor, manager, regular touch base appointments, meetings are required as well. That will have, tasks over the next week or two, and there's an expectation that if they're not complete, that there would be, a conversation as to why. And it could simply be that other more pressing items have come up, and the manager would certainly be aware of that as well.
Because I would be in support of more information in terms of how the day was rolling out, and it might be blocks of time. I mean, legal aid, we billed by the minute, so, letter 2 minutes. So I guess for me, the two key things are productivity, which I think you've addressed quite a bit. Through yours, I've heard cases nationally where productivity tanked and they brought everybody back in. And then I'm hearing through you stories that productivity is even better. So, we're going to be able to continue. But also a reminder that we keep front and center that we are in the people business. So we have to be very cautious about what we're doing with that hybrid model, because the public loses confidence if they don't see faces to the things they're inquiring about and need information on. And I think that's everything I had. So thank you very much for updating us.
Thank you. Councillor Potts?
Thanks, Mayor Hamlin. To Executive Director Peg, thanks for the presentation. I'm obviously not in support of remote work or hybrid work, as it may be called. These are my concerns. In this, you may take some questions out of it. I'm not expecting all answers today, but I do want to put it on the public record of what my concerns are. My concerns, I'm focusing on staff serving the public. What happens or how the private sector certainly, what happens in the private sector doesn't apply in this case. We have a large percentage of residents who do not use nor have access to social media or rely on email. So they feel more comfortable coming in and, dealing with whether it's a manager, a supervisor, or who it may be in person in the office. Currently, the town of Collingwood is paying for a fair amount of office space that's currently sitting empty. We're covering the cost, obviously, of heat, air conditioning, office equipment, etc. Currently, there's many vehicles that have been assigned to staff that are now working remote or hybrid that are sitting and not being used. I personally feel, and I think it's a feeling of the public, that staff working remote, this has caused a significant divide between the remote staff and the staff who have to be in the workplace every day. Just recently, the town of Collingwood has spent over $30,000 on third-party investigations trying to rebuild workplace relationships. In my opinion, a large portion of this could have been prevented if the management and staff were in the workplace every day monitoring the day-to-day activities. If staff working remote need to come into the office today and during the day to get supplies, are they being paid for the time to their travel to and work? I know that when staff are coming to work each day, their time of pay starts when they start work. So probably look for clarification on that. Understanding the days are gone of hiring staff within the community. If staff are hired from outside the town, I feel they should all report to the workplace every day. It is my understanding that staff who live out of town are paid mileage to and from work daily. I would certainly like some clarification on that point. And the answers in the past for reasons of remote work being there's not enough office space. When hiring a position, knowing they'll be remote, are the wages reflected on that? And also, I was also wondering, can staff provide a date on when the Town of Collingwood's vehicle policy is going to be coming to council for review? And my last note, these days individuals are struggling, staff are struggling. It doesn't matter if it's here or where. And it's quite comforting to know that you can walk down the hall and speak to your manager. And it's completely not acceptable to wait days for an email, or even worse, having a meeting over Zoom. Those are my comments.
Thank you. That's thorough. Are you able to answer some of these things today, Executive Director Peg?
Thank you, Chair. I'd be happy to try and address the ones that I think I can. I was trying to take notes and listen at the same time. So if I miss something, certainly CEO Skinner, if I've missed anything you'd like to add, I would be thankful. So one component that jumped out to me is just around paid mileage for staff that live out of the community. Absolutely not. Staff are only paid mileage if it meets the requirements of our procedure, which would be if you were attending a training event or something to that effect. But that would apply to all employees, certainly not employees, commuting into work, whether they live within Collingwood or not. That's not happening. Wage reflective of the remote policy. So our non-union positions are put through a job evaluation program, which does take into consideration working conditions. So working conditions, if you have the option to work in an office, work at home, that is a factor that would be considered. Same how if you have folks that are working on a job site or are labor intense positions, those working conditions are considered in job evaluation. In terms of customer service and, the concern that inquiries take too long to respond to, we are making a conscious effort right now to promote the single contact through our customer service team, our centralized team, where customer service standards do apply. We are in the process of the customer service evolution. As I mentioned, our manager of customer service will be coming in front of council in the near future to propose some even further corporate standards to help address some of the concerns that we've been hearing from residents and council and even internally. So to help address that, and again, regardless of the remote policy or not, we recognize that now is a great time to revisit those standards and make some recommended updates and changes pending council's input. In terms of the impact on working relationships between remote and non-remote employees, that's something that we're certainly aware of. And I shouldn't say we're aware of the impact that it's having. We're aware that certain policies and procedures, if they can't be implemented consistently across an organization, can have an impact. Specifically regarding some of the folks, for example, within public works or fire and rescue that don't have access to those programs, we are continuously looking for opportunities to try and recognize them outside of that. And in terms of public works, where there was mention to some investigations, I'm certainly, personally attending that site and speaking with the frontline employees to understand what ways we can further recognize them and interact with them. And I know CEO Skinner is aligned with that as well. The component around residents want to come in and deal with a person face-to-face. As I mentioned, customer service counters open during business hours every day of the week, and that team is accessible. If an employee is not available due to remote work, every effort will be made to contact them and put them in touch with that individual. But I will also say that regardless of remote work, there could be incidents where a resident comes in to meet with someone who's not available. So for example, if someone walked in right now and asked to speak with CEO Skinner, unfortunately, she's not available. So we do encourage, if you're looking for a specific individual and to meet in person, that you would make an appointment in advance. That way we're sure that they're available and ready to meet with you. And if there's any pre-work, that can be done to make the most use of everyone's time. So again, recognizing that remote may have an impact, and that's one of the things that we're looking at, but you're not always guaranteed to walk in and get the exact person you're looking for regardless. And we're certainly aware and mindful that we are public servants. Customer service is a top priority for us, and it will continue to be regardless to where our staff are working. We're keen to hear impact from the public. So if people have specific concerns, there's a number of forms that are available online to submit concerns. But I'd also personally be very interested in chatting with folks if they have, run into a barrier in accessing our services. I'm happy to hear from them and how we might be able to make some changes to make sure that they have the access that they need. And if there was any others, I didn't catch them in my notes. I apologize.
Councillor Baines? Oh, sorry. Did you have any follow-up, Councillor Potts?
Not at this time. Thanks, Mayor Hanlon.
Okay. Councillor Baines?
Thank you very much. Through you, the chair, to Executive Director Peg. The world of HR is confusing for many individuals. For perhaps council and the public in general, can you please explain to us generically how it is HR, if you will, assesses or takes the temperature, if you will, of the corporation? And by this, I'm specifically meaning the assessments of 360-degree climate survey or organizational climate surveys or confidential 360-degree assessments, et cetera, so that HR is aware of issues between managers and their employees or vice versa, and then deals with them. This is most particularly important, I would assume, prior to COVID, during COVID, and now after COVID, so that HR will be able to tell the CAO and council, we need to fix something here and we're working on it. So it would be in the same assessments before COVID, during COVID, and now after COVID, which will help you in turn make a recommendation to us about whether or not remote working is working or not. Sorry, it's such a long-winded thing, but I think such an explanation helps everyone.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Through to the councillor. So we have a number of tools in place that we use to help assess, I'll call it the temperature of the organization and the culture. We did complete an employee engagement and well-being survey that provided us a baseline. So it was the first survey of that nature that the town of Collingwood had completed for our staff, and it provided us with a baseline. I'll say overall that the feedback was positive, but there was certainly some specific divisions or departments where there was work to be done. We've identified action items. We have a mechanism in place for tracking those action items. And the status of the action items is actually available on the staff portal. So employees can log in at any time, see what their feedback was, and see what stage we're in implementing any of those recommendations that were selected. Not only did we do the corporate-wide survey, but we did department and division-specific workshops where department heads, managers, and supervisors met with their teams to talk through recommendations to address the findings through the survey. In addition to that, we put in our work plan for 2023, what's called a pulse survey. So we'll be rechecking with staff or checking in with staff to see how the last year and a half has gone and see if we have any improvement in certain areas or if there's been a decline in other areas. And that will help us identify how successful have the changes that we've made over the last year and a half been, and are there new changes that need to be implemented to address some of the challenges that may still be in place. Also, as part of our performance review process, I call it performance review, but actually Director Culver, I'll say, coined the term year in review, and I thought that sounded so much nicer. So in our annual year in review meetings with staff, it's also an opportunity to have that one-on-one conversation that's not just a survey or a check-in in a group setting, where managers, supervisors, and department heads are encouraged to have a real heart-to-heart with their employees around how are things going, how is disconnect from work going, how are you finding the different policies, procedures, workload, operational plan, all those different things. And each of our managers, supervisors, department heads have been provided with a toolkit, we'll call it, or a guide to help ensure that those conversations are consistent across the organization and making sure that every employee has that opportunity to provide their individual feedback. Of course, we have policies in place like respect in the workplace, whistleblower. So if there was something completely egregious going on that employees just didn't feel they had an avenue to bring that forward, that by all means our whistleblower policy or in confidence to human resources would be an option if they felt there was a workplace practice that was just being misused, abused, not implemented. That's also an option in place.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Councillor Doherty?
Thank you, Chair. Through you to the Executive Director, I must say that I am generally in support of this policy. It is no secret that not only this municipality, but every municipality in Ontario and possibly Canada is challenged with recruitment and retention right now. So if this is how we can recruit good people and keep them, then so be it. And as long as we are monitoring productivity and accountability and job satisfaction, then it works. I do share Councillor Jeffrey's concern to some degree that were the percentage of office workers continue to grow in a remote work status, we are ultimately in the business of serving people. And where does that leave us when, a vast majority of our staff are not in the office in a physical sense? I do have some concern, how it works in departments where some can participate in a remote work contract and others can't. And just the thought occurred to me actually as you were speaking that maybe there's an opportunity there for staff who cannot participate for whatever reason based on their job description in a remote work option, that maybe they be given the option of a 4-day work week. And remote workers would continue to work as they do. And then so that provides, some balance and incentive. If I just may continue, I would be curious about how the cost of office space was calculated, because it just seems so high to me. And I'm wondering if we can prevail upon yourself or one of our managers to explain that.
Do you need a friend or are you ready?
Thank you, Chair. I think I'll use my call a friend option and
Okay.
ask Manager McNulty if he could speak to some of the financials, please.
Go ahead, Manager McNulty.
Thank you. I guess the starting point for some of the capital costs that we've utilized were the facility condition assessments for the various facilities. And so we selected a cross-section of facilities that are administrative in nature and looked at the replacement value for those facilities, essentially divided by the square footage. And in some cases needed to make some adjustments for the likes of the town hall, which a good part of the second floor is public space in the council chambers. But that resulted in a range of the capital cost, the replacement capital cost of a workstation between $64,000 and $240,000, depending on which facility it was in, what the fit and finish would be like, and so on. And so then we looked at it a second way, which is to take an average office space of 100 square feet, which is essentially a 10 by 10 office. We certainly have some that are much smaller than that. We have some that are bigger than that. And again, through the previous reports, the facility condition assessments, and the previous accommodation review assumptions and background data, we had factors available for how to scale up that 100 square foot office to incorporate the other amenities that contribute to that office, like hallways and washrooms and meeting spaces and kitchen areas and walls, for instance. And so that, using a conservative estimate for a new build of $300 a square foot, that provides us a cost per office, that 100 square foot office, of $82,500, considering a new build. And so when we look at our comparison of our existing facilities between $64,000 and $240,000, that $82,500 is not the lowest, but it's next to the lowest cost alternative to provide a new office space. So we can take that a step further in terms of remote work. And if we consider that we provide one hoteling station or one shared workstation, whichever it may be, for every 3 employees on average, then we can take that capital cost of $82,500, and 2/3 of that would be the capital cost avoidance for each remote worker that we have. And additionally, and so that's a capital cost avoidance, which is a one-time spend of $55,000 for each additional workspace we need to create. On top of that, we have operating costs, and we estimate the operating costs to be $1.75 million per year to operate our administrative facilities. So town hall, 43 Stewart Road, the office area of Public Works, the office area of Parks. But it does not include the operating costs of the Central Park Arena in total, for instance, because we've removed the cost of making ice and running the arena. It does include a small portion that is primarily what we would consider to be the staff occupied offices. And so if we take that 1.75 million annually and we divide it by the number of workstations that we currently have throughout the administration centers, we have 132 workstations. And so 1.75 million divided by the 132 workstations turns out to be about $12,750. And so when Amanda mentioned the $1,000 per workstation in saved operating costs associated to remote workers, that's where that number comes from, $1,000 per month per remote worker. And I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any follow-up?
Yes, thank you. That's a very thorough response. I would probably have to take my socks and shoes off to count past 10 on those calculations, but I appreciate that. I understand. I just mention also anecdotally, in the New York Times on the weekend, there was an article on the Scotiabank who are now administering personality tests to new employees to determine whether they are best suited to a remote or on-site job. It's interesting. Anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Farr?
Thank you, Mayor Hamlin. And thank you for the very detailed report. I was going to ask about the costs as well, and Director McNulty's explanation was excellent to that. I too have over the past few months have been discussing with public with concerns and questions and such about things. It may be from a experience, or it may be not. I think it's partially from the post-COVID attitude change that's inevitable, which is people are having maybe a less willingness to accept accommodations that have to be made because of the pandemic. So they're looking to see that standard that used to be there before for them, and in the municipal services, I do strongly believe a standard is visibility at the office and accessibility, and I do appreciate the explanations and the statistics you've given us to show that productivity is being studied very, very carefully, and then also the information about how many workers there are, and it seems to be in that kind of a 20 to 24 or 25% range. All that information is great because, as I said, I'm being questioned by people. Having those kinds of statistical information to show that we're studying it closely and trying to make sure we're on top of what's the best way to operate going forward. We'll never get back to the former way we did things. We'd like to think that everything we do that is a result of the pandemic and what it taught us is for the benefit of the municipality going forward. So those are my comments.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Jeffrey?
A point of clarification, when we talk about a 4-day week, are we talking same weekly hours in 4 days? Okay.
I think, yes, Executive Director Peg, could you answer that, please?
Thank you, Chair. Different organizations implement it differently. So some organizations, specifically in Europe, have said a 4-day work week is 4 days at your current daily hours, but you're paid for 5 days. Some organizations have said, we're going to take your 35-hour work week or your 40-hour work week, and you'll make those hours within the 4 days. So it really depends on the organization.
Thank you.
Follow-up.
Yes.
So that would be something that would come back to council in terms of, or is that a CAO determination as long as they're living within their budget? I'm just curious as to how that decision gets made.
Yes, CEO, could you address that?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. The delegations of authority that were done as part of the CAO bylaw was an update to council several months before the election. Does delegate the operations of the municipality to the CAO, so that would include the vehicle policy. However, I think that there are some things that are very important that council is aware of, because ultimately you are accountable that the municipality is well run. And I would think something that was as big a decision as a 4-day work week would be something where even if I have the ability to make some of those decisions, where I'd want to make council aware of the changes and how they may affect the municipality. There are some benefits to that type of work week. For example, you may be able to find, for example, customer service folks who might work into the evening, which would make the ability to have a real person answer your questions, for example, last a little longer. And so as Executive Director Peg and her staff look through that option later this year, there may be some advantages and probably some disadvantages on that particular piece. Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Potts.
Yeah, just on the note of a 4-day work week, I know a few years back it was in discussion. There's other actually maybe counties that in the operations departments that have implemented 4-day work weeks, and the way it kind of was going to roll out. Obviously, we know with our and I'll use public works is in the winter. It's difficult to get time off and with the weather. So I know that it was kind of discussed within the group that there was a potential option where if they went to a 4-day work week, giving in the summer now staff take a lot of Fridays or take a lot of Mondays. So it would mutually be worked out that you could do your 4 days where half the crew could do Monday to Thursday and the other half could do, Tuesday to Friday. So there are ways that can do it, and I'm actually not opposed to the idea. But I think in this perspective here, going from, we're talking now about 4-day work weeks for staff that can't work remote. I really, I just want to stress again that, the focus should be on the remote staff, and we deal with that issue first before we open up a whole new program for something else. So those are my comments.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions of Executive Director Pegg? Yes, CEO Skinner.
Thank you. I did just have a couple of things I wanted to mention in relation to comments that have been made. We don't have a lot of office space sitting empty. We were already up around where we were at our max. In fact, just before COVID, we were looking at seeing if we could rent space in the community. COVID allowed us to have a bit of breathing space for that, but there's been a few people added back. Places like the library are quite full, including all the hybrid stations. So while we're not in the situation that we were pre-COVID, as the years go by, and not too many years, we'll be looking again at being full. And it is quite expensive to expand, as you've heard. There's no real change in our vehicle use. People should be using their vehicles for their work. So if by definition you need a vehicle to do your work, you'd still be using that vehicle to do the work. There were some that were sitting more idle during COVID, but that work has all, to my knowledge, I would say generally all restarted from whether it's bylaw or other uses of those vehicles. And I think it was mentioned briefly, but the climate impacts are good. We've got people who are driving to the office less days per week and still able to do the work. I think it's really important that we have council's help to explain what is happening. The reason that we've looked at remote and hybrid work is for the good of the community. It's like a council member, when you are reading your materials or talking to the people out in the community, I know you're very, very self-directed people and don't need anyone to make sure that you do your work. And we have a lot of people in our staff that are very self-directed. It doesn't mean that we don't monitor, but we have a lot of very dedicated, very skilled staff here that do great things for the municipality, even when they're working remotely. And this was, how do we do even better for the municipality and for the taxpayers here, as opposed to this is just a benefit for staff. It is meant to be about how do we do the best we can for the municipality. You're asking great questions. All these questions need to be asked because of our accountability on those tax pieces. But I just wanted to make sure you really, truly understood why some of these things had been put forward. And that was the main things I wanted to mention. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll just finish by saying I think having a pandemic that has, that continued for an extraordinarily long period of time has made every business and every level of government having to pivot on so many different fronts. And it does always strike me that the question about hybrid and remote work is one of those major pivots that it will, from my perspective, it will be very interesting to see in 5 years where we are with all of this. I feel we're still coming out of everybody having to be at home because that's the only safe place to be. And from what I read, I can see everyone from, companies that have thousands of employees to companies that have a few are still struggling with what is the best way to do this. And thank you, Executive Director Peg, for your analysis of this and your continual monitoring, because of course, for a community that has so many employees and for this council, we can't see what people are doing at home. And only you really can, be advising us on this. So thank you for that work. From my perspective, I think it's just so important that all our staff feel engaged with the rest of the staff and with the community, and that they collaborate. And I am a firm believer that in most instances, collaboration should be done in person. We lose a lot with virtual meetings. So that's just a comment I'm offering you. It's not a question. And thank you for bringing that forward today. Okay, so we'll just move on. We have, are there any public delegations today?
Thank you, Your Worship. We do have a number of attendees participating remotely. If anyone would like to address the Strategic Initiative Standing Committee, Corporate and Community Services Standing Committee, please press the raise your hand feature. And not at this time, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. So the next item on our agenda is other business, and I believe there's three things. We have an update from Councillor Jeffrey. We have a notice of motion that Councillor Doherty wishes to bring, and a notice of motion that Councillor Perry's going to bring. So we'll start with Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Hamlin. Staff have a video that's been prepared for an International Women's Day this week on by way of an update in what I've been doing internationally. And I would have just one explanation or comment after the video. Being it is International Women's Day this week, I wanted to comment on the art piece in the video.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for joining us for the Town of Collingwood's International Women's Day event. It is such a pleasure for me to speak about my continuing work in international development through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, FCM. If you attended last year's virtual event, you would recall that I had been working as an FCM governance representative in the Jordan Municipal Support Program, JMSP, since October of 2020. The project aims to strengthen the resilience of 12 Jordanian communities in central and southern Jordan. Focus areas include municipal strategic planning, public engagement, solid waste management services, as well as knowledge sharing in Jordan and in Canada. And the project runs until June 2023. An expanded participatory gender audit, PGA, was undertaken. The project is currently supporting their Ministry of Local Administration to develop a first ever ministerial gender policy and action plan. Jordanian municipal representatives reporting on their progress acknowledged their learnings, and one example of which was an elected official who explained that their community was proud of the fact that they were moving their garbage to a landfill site. However, they had not recognized the negative impact that their site was having environmentally, and in particular on their drinking water supply, until this project. So a couple of additional highlights I'd like to share. Here you see proud volunteers in Quirra Municipality using recycled materials to make reusable bags with machines provided by GMSP. The following pictures show residents of Amal Katan warmly welcoming JMSP representatives who supported the municipality to create a safe space for kids while also reaching out to rural places, putting a smile on kids' faces. JMSP also supported the municipality with solar panels. My first in-person mission to Jordan begins March 10th until March 17th. I'm excited to join Canadian and Jordanian partners to share and celebrate the successful outcomes of this project as it nears its conclusion in June, and to meet with the project steering committee and an ambassador's representative from the embassy to build on ensuring a sustainable continuation of the best practice developed in the communities in Jordan through this project. This immediate past February 3rd to 12th, I am embarked upon my first mission as a Canadian volunteer expert to the PMI Will Project in Ghana, Africa. Partnerships for Innovation, Women in Local Leadership. It was a busy 9-day mission with long travel and specific deliverables, including strategic planning training and strat plan development, advocacy, and peer-to-peer engagements, with a goal to develop actions to increase the participation of women in local leadership. 16 elected and appointed women politicians of the District Women's Caucus of the National Association of Local Authorities of Ghana traveled as far as 12 hours to attend the 2-day training session in Accra. A day later, traveling 2 hours through the mountains to Koforidua in the eastern region, I firstly met with the longest serving woman politician of Ghana, the Honorable MCE, our equivalent of Mayor Comfort Asante, and I discussed strategies and ideas to increase women in local leadership, both administratively and politically. 100% of the mayors of Jordan are appointed by the president of the country. Following that meeting, I joined 40 elected and appointed women politicians. They each explained how they could be more effective if supported with training, resources, and allyship. And here's a picture of an example of the results we can achieve through this work, and for which I am hopeful for in Ghana. This is PMI Will in Cambodia last year. To foster gender equality, FCM trained 665 female municipal candidates in Cambodia. When the election results came in, 30% more women were elected to local councils. I believe in the relevance, significance, and importance of these missions, and I am so proud to be a Collingwood resident and woman municipal council member to make history in Ghana as the first ever Canadian volunteer expert to participate in their goals to increase women in local leadership. Our community is embracing equity at home and globally. Congratulations and enjoy the rest of the event. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Oh,
Do you have a few comments?
Yeah, well, no, I think the video is pretty clear, explains a lot of things. There's so much I could go on and on about what I learned and what I taught. But I just wanted to comment on the one art piece behind me in the video. It's a Ghanaian, it has the Ghanaian or African woman with the continent above. And the representation of that is the Ghanaian and African mother nurturing future generations for the continent. So. Pretty significant message in that piece. So, yeah, so anytime there's any questions on what I'm working on internationally, I'm always pleased to answer and entertain.
Okay, well, thank you for that update. It's very interesting. Councillor Doherty, you have a motion.
Thank you, Worship. I was actually intending to bring it at SIC.
Oh,
I'm happy to table it now,
No,
but
SIC is good. Okay, thank you. Over to you, Councillor.
Well, thank you, Mayor Hanlon. And in regard to the presentation from Georgian Bay Forever, which I'm fairly confident in saying, or comfortable in saying, is quite an eye-opener what's going on into the water. So I'd like to bring forward a notice of motion that Council approved the request for $5,000 for hiring of local summer students to conduct weekly shoreline cleanups and to educate the community on the effects of plastic pollution, as well as work with and train youth and adult volunteers. And I'll ask Clerk Almas to tweak the wording on this notice of motion if necessary. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there any other business this afternoon? Seeing none, I think we're ready to adjourn. All those in, I need a motion. Wait, who's going to do it? Councillor Jeffrey. Okay. All those in favor? And that's unanimous. Thank you. And let's return at 5:10.